Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this historic and important hearing. My name is Catherine Hubbard. I am a senior attorney at Civil Rights Corps, a nonprofit organization dedicated to challenging systemic injustice in the United States legal system, a system built on white supremacy and economic inequality. Today, I will be discussing the disproportionate financial costs that the criminal legal system has inflicted on Black Californians and why these harms should be included in the conversation about reparations. A point I hope to make clear is that the costs that the criminal legal system imposes on Black families are not hypothetical or indeterminate. Many are readily identifiable and quantifiable. Factoring these costs into a calculation of reparations owed is therefore feasible and necessary. Next slide. In 2017, working with the San Francisco Public Defender's Office, I filed a habeas petition in California's first appellate district seeking the release of Kenneth Humphrey from unconstitutional pretrial detention. Mr. Humphrey was a 63-year-old Black man, a retired shipyard laborer, and a lifelong resident of San Francisco. He had been accused of stealing $7 and a bottle of cologne from his neighbor. Based on these allegations, he was charged with burglary and robbery, and a judge set his bail at $600,000, far outside his ability to pay. Ultimately, Mr. Humphrey would spend nearly a year locked in a cage while presumptively innocent, solely because of his inability to pay money bail. Next slide. Mr. Humphrey's case was typical of how San Francisco's bail system operated at the time. While Black adults represented only 6% of the adult population of San Francisco, they represented 40% of people arrested and 44% of people booked in county jail. Black people also made up approximately 38% of individuals paying bail. Over 99% of people who posted bail used a commercial surety bond, meaning that Black arrestees and their families paid up to $5.7 million annually in non-refundable fees to bail agents. Next slide. After the Court of Appeal granted his habeas petition, Mr. Humphrey was released from pretrial detention, and the charges against him were ultimately dismissed. His case resulted in a landmark decision by the California Supreme Court, striking down trial courts' pervasive practice of setting money bail without inquiry into an individual's ability to pay or consideration of alternative conditions of release. But although his case will now benefit thousands of indigent Californians every year, Mr. Humphrey is still suffering significant consequences of his unjust pretrial detention. While in jail, he was evicted from his apartment in a complex that provides affordable housing to seniors. Upon his release from a residential treatment program, he had no housing in San Francisco and no choice but to move in with family in the East Bay. Although he longs to return to San Francisco, he has been unable to do so because he cannot find affordable housing. The racially biased criminal legal system took his home from him. Next slide. Mr. Humphrey's story of unjust jailing and its devastating financial impact is all too familiar among Black families in the United States. Anti-Black racism pervades our criminal legal system. Black people continue to be caged and separated from their families and communities at rates far outpacing that of white people. Nationwide, Black people are incarcerated at nearly 5 times the rate of whites, including while they are awaiting trial and presumed innocent. Discriminatory policies and practices pervade all stages of the criminal process. Black people are more likely to be stopped by police, detained pre-trial, charged with more serious crimes, convicted, and sentenced more harshly than white people. Next slide. These national trends are also reflected in California's criminal legal system, both historically and today. In the 2010s, California adopted a series of justice reforms that have substantially reduced mass incarceration. But while incarceration declined nearly across the board, by the end of the 2010s, men and women of color continued to be incarcerated at higher rates than white men and women, and some racial disparities actually widened. The likelihood that men of color were incarcerated at the state level compared to white men generally increased during the 2010s. In 2019, Black men made up 28% of men incarcerated by the state, nearly 5 times higher than their share of all men in California, and Black women made up 26% of women incarcerated by the state, more than 4 times higher than their share of all women in California. Additionally, when Black Californians are subjected to traffic stops, they are at least twice as likely to be asked to step out of a vehicle, to be handcuffed, or to experience a stop involving an officer's weapon. They are twice as likely to be booked into jail, despite the fact that searches of Black people are less likely to result in the officer finding contraband. Next slide. Because of the well-documented overrepresentation of Black people in the criminal legal system, the economic cost that system imposes fall disproportionately on Black people. These costs begin shortly after arrest with the requirement to pay money bail. Whether the person pays bail, almost always by paying a non-refundable fee to a bail agent, or whether the person remains in jail awaiting trial, they and their family experience enormous costs. Next slide. Money bail amounts in California are extraordinarily high. The median bail amount in California, $50,000, is more than 5 times the median bail amount in the rest of the country. Because money bail in California has historically been so expensive, the vast majority of people cannot afford to pay the full amount of refundable bail to the court. They therefore are forced to avail themselves of the non-refundable fees and predatory practices of the bail bond industry. Next slide. Commercial bail bond companies in California require people to pay non-refundable premiums of 10% of the full bond bail amount. Companies keep these premiums regardless of case outcome, even when formal charges are never filed in court, charges are dismissed, or the arrestee appears in court for all required hearings. Those who purchase or co-sign a bail bond, usually the family or friends of the arrestee, typically sign a legal contract obligating them to pay the full bail amount if a court date is missed. Occasionally, the bail agent requires the arrestee or family or friends to collateralize the full bail amount with real or personal property. If bail is forfeited, the agent may require payment of the full bail amount, in addition to other costs associated with the failure to appear and bond forfeiture proceedings. If neither the arrestee nor the cosigner is able to satisfy these costs with cash, the bail agent may seize and liquidate any collateral, often the home or personal property of the arrestee's family or friends. Next slide. Although paying non-refundable fees to bail agents can be ruinously expensive, the economic consequences of not paying money bail and remaining in pretrial detention are often as bad or even worse. When people are jailed, even just for a few days, they are at risk of losing their job, their income, and their housing. This sets off a cycle of jailing and poverty that can be nearly impossible to get out of. Not only do people held in pretrial detention often lose their jobs, but pretrial detention also has long-term effects on an individual's employment. A recent study found that 3 to 4 years after a bail hearing, people arrested who are not released are 9.4% less likely to be formally employed. People held in pretrial detention often lose their housing due to inability to pay rent. Income loss can also push individuals deeper into debt through missed payments to creditors, leading to a cycle of economic harms as vehicles and items needed for work are repossessed. Pretrial detention also puts enormous pressure on individuals to plead guilty. By cutting people off from family, friends, jobs, and communities, and subjecting them to the miserable conditions in jails, the criminal system puts arrestees in a position where they face huge incentives to plead guilty in order to end or minimize their pretrial detention. Numerous studies show that people who are detained pretrial are more likely to be convicted, more likely to receive a sentence of incarceration, receive longer sentences, and pay higher court fees. These negative case outcomes prolong separation from families and inability to make any significant amounts of money. Next slide. Next slide. The disproportionate number of Black people arrested and charged, the higher bail amounts required of Black arrestees, and the wealth gap for Black families combine to put a disproportionate number of Black people in pretrial detention, suffering the negative consequences discussed previously. One study found that Black men received money bail that is 35% higher on average when controlling for the seriousness of the offense. It also found that money bail amounts for Black people are on average $7,000 higher for violent crimes and $13,000 higher for drug crimes. Another study revealed that Black arrestees were 66% more likely than white arrestees to be jailed pre-trial. Looking at similarly situated arrestees, Black arrestees were twice as likely as white arrestees to receive bond amounts they could not afford. Compounding the issue of higher bail amounts is the fact that Black families are less likely to be able to pay any amount of bail because of the wealth gap. The average wealth for white families is 7 to 10 times higher than average wealth for Black families. More than 1 in 4 Black households have zero or negative net worth. This gap represents the accumulated effects of centuries of institutionalized and economic racism. Next slide. And next slide. Bail or pretrial detention are only the beginning of the many costs that the criminal legal system disproportionately inflicts on Black people. Another direct cost of the system are fines imposed as punishment following convictions and fees which are charged to raise revenue for the court system. The majority of California's fees date back to the 1990s on the heels of the super predator myth, a racist and debunked theory that predicted an increase in violent crime due to a generation of Black youth who were supposedly prone to violence. As part of an effort to stave off the so-called super predators, the California legislature enacted numerous fines and fees, many that are still in use today. In recent years, California has become a leader nationwide in eliminating certain court fees and forgiving debts. But the laws do not go far enough. They have left in place county-level criminal fines, state and local criminal fees, and non-criminal fines and fees imposed by the state as well as local governments. They also did not reform or eliminate the state's fees for traffic tickets, which are among the highest in the country and disproportionately affect Black people. Black adults in California remain up to 10 times more likely than white adults to be cited for a low-level infraction. Slide. Next slide. Thank you. The incarceration of a loved one often has a profoundly destabilizing economic impact on immediate family members. Family members absorb financial costs of jailing, such as attorney's fees, phone calls, travel expenses, and commissary bills. These costs begin to stack up at the same time the family is losing the financial support of their loved one. A 1998 study of the female partners of incarcerated Black men in a California state prison found that on average, women were spending $292 a month on visits, phone calls, and packages, equivalent to more than $450 today. Families also bear opportunity costs. People with incarcerated loved ones report that the incarceration has required them to work more hours, get a different job, or turn down an educational opportunity. The costs place strain on key familial relationships and communities. Prisoners speak of their reluctance to call family while in prison because of the monetary burden prison phone calls place on their loved ones. This strain on family relationships is starkly counterproductive to the goal of rehabilitation, as studies have shown that the most important factor in a prisoner's successful reentry is a strong family relationship. Next slide. While California has made efforts to lower its incarceration rate and reduce racial disparities in the criminal legal system, decades of mass incarceration and racist laws and practices mean that significant generational damage has already been done. When a parent is incarcerated, family income drops significantly, and extended family members may have to share custody of children and take on additional caretaking labor. Families often obtain little to no increase in financial or material support when assuming childcare roles. This lack of support and loss of resources creates a burden for family members across generations and pushes both older adults and children deeper into poverty. Once they have been released, justice-involved people face thousands of legal sanctions that can prevent them from getting a job, obtaining a license, attaining and maintaining housing, qualifying for public assistance, pursuing higher education, and changing immigration status. People with criminal records also face discrimination in hiring decisions. These impacts lead to higher rates of homelessness and unemployment, lower cumulative earnings, and difficulties pursuing educational opportunities. The consequences of having a criminal record have direct and substantial impacts on families, particularly minor children. The barriers undermine the family's well-being in terms of income, savings, and assets, education, housing, and stability, and in turn negatively affect family cohesion. As a result, people with records lose access to opportunities, driving and keeping their families in poverty across generations. Next slide. As I hope this testimony has made clear, the disproportionate costs that the racially biased criminal legal system imposes on Black families are readily identifiable and quantifiable. These costs have harmed generations of Black Californians and continue to cause immense suffering to this day. It is crucial that an accounting of the debts owed to Black Californians as a result of the state's racist policies and practices include the costs of the criminal legal system. Thank you.